It is Satan's work to flatter. He deals in flattery as well as in accusing and condemnation. Thus, he seeks to work the ruin of the soul. Those who give praise to men are used by Satan as his agents. Let the workers of Christ direct every word of praise away from themselves. Let self be put out of sight. Christ alone is to be exalted. Unto him that loved us and washed us from our sins in his own blood, let every eye be directed and praise from every heart ascend. The second one is taken from Testimonies, Volume 1. And it says, if any speak one word of flattery to you, rebuke them sharply. Tell them that Satan has troubled you with that for some time, and they need not help him in his work. So this is I see it's nothing to do with what we're studying, but as we have some ministers here who are breaking the bread of life to us this weekend, we have to be very careful of what we say. We have to guard our words, making sure we don't say anything that could cause someone to stumble. Not only here, but just anywhere. I haven't really got much of a reason to say it now, but just something for us to understand. Elsewhere, Ellen White says that you can speak one word of flattery to somebody and cause their ruin by that one word. And so maybe be our brother's keeper this weekend, and we pray for our brethren. So let's also act in harmony with that. Back to the trumpets. So we've seen in Revelation chapter 8, we have these seven angels with 7 trumpets, and they go about doing this work of bringing the downfall of a city or a kingdom. And we found one way through the sanctuary in order to locate the time period where we should be seeing these trumpets. And through the understanding of the sanctuary, we realized that Christ was in the holy place between 31 AD and 1844 AD. So in Revelation chapter 8, when we see this scene of the angels with the trumpets, and they're in the next one, angel who's ministering before the golden altar of incense, it gives us a time period when that could be, because thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. It gives us types in terms of events, but it also gives us some time periods. And so we went through the different kingdoms which these trumpets would bring a downfall to, and we found that there's 2 kingdoms which are reigning between the time period of 41 AD and 1844 AD. Just pagan Rome and papal Rome. I know we mentioned the USA did come into power before 1844, but we haven't seen the downfall of that kingdom as yet, that nation as yet. So this is where we locate these trumpets. And so we were looking at what work these trumpets do in the bringing down of pagan Rome and papal Rome. So my presentation was not really to touch on the first 4 trumpets, but we had a very quick lightning blast review of the first 4 trumpets, which brought down Western Rome. And we saw that in the book of Proverbs, it says, the curse causeless shall not come. And White told us that the reason why you have national ruin, or the ruin of the kingdom, is because of national apostasy. And what did she define this national apostasy as? It was a Sunday law. So we saw with pagan Rome, there was a Sunday law in 321 AD, and roughly 70 years later, as the Sunday law got more and more restrictive on Sunday and more oppressive for keeping Sabbath, that you had this response of these trumpets. Now, when these trumpets came, they were almost like a distraction. So you have these Sunday laws which are enforced on God's people, but then now when these trumpets come, the powers that enforce these trumpets, so this like the military powers, they're distracted. They have to go fight the trumpets, and that leaves God's people more free to worship freely. And we'll see that same principle in the three roles. So we saw that the first four trumpets were the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Huns. And we saw that these were the same. Out of those 4 trumpets, 3 of them were the horns which were plucked up before the papacy came into power in 538 AD. And that's where we picked up, and that's where we got to. So in 538 AD, the papacy enforced a Sunday law which is already existing. So they more or less passed the Sunday law. Like now we have blue laws in place. So the Sunday law is technically there, but then when the papacy will come, they'll just enforce a lot of those ones or just actually put them into effect. So in the United States, I know there's many states where you have these very insidious laws about evangelism and things like that. You can be taken to Guantanamo Bay right now and under some of the laws, but they just don't enforce them yet. So that's what happened in 538 AD, and as a response to that, you had what? You had the trumpets beginning in 606 AD. We had the first 4 trumpets already passed, so in 606 AD we have the 5th trumpet, which was going to start. And now we get this from the book of Revelation chapter 9. Okay. So before that, let's have a quick look at Islam in the Bible. As we're going to say, we're going to see that the 3 woes refer to the Islamic powers. And so we just wanted to have a quick look at what kind of role they've played in history. So who do Muslims say is their like forefather, like their Abraham, and then Ishmael. So Abraham, he was promised a son, a promised son, and what happened? He believed God, but he didn't really believe, so he decided to take things into his own hand and have a child. And that was not the promised seed. So when we say we are children of Abraham, it's through the seed of Isaac, because Isaac was a type of Christ. Because remember, Abraham went to kill Isaac on Mount Moriah, and he submitted himself just as Christ would submit himself to die. I'm sure there's many other ways of showing it, but Isaac was a type of Christ. But then the Muslims take the lineage from Ishmael instead. And so we just have a look at the history of Ishmael and see if there's any aspects of Ishmael which we can then understand, help us understand what role Islam would have at the end of the world. Remember we said that the ancient men show us the future. God shows us the end from the beginning. So when we go into Genesis, when we go into chapter 1, it tells us about Garden of Eden. Chapter 1 and 2 tells us about the Garden of Eden and all these things. In chapter 3 tells us how sin comes in. Then when we go to Revelation, the last book, it tells us how sin comes out and how the Garden of Eden is restored and the recreation of man, so to speak. So we'll go to Genesis, and although it's in the past, it's showing us the future, right? So if we go to Genesis chapter 16, verse 1, it says, "Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abraham, Behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go into my maid, that it may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abraham hearkened unto the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abraham had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abraham to be his wife." And this is where Ishmael then comes from, that relation. But already an important thing to see is, before even Ishmael is born, the circumstances which lead him to being active, to coming into the world, is a restraint, right? So we see here Sarah is restrained, and this will be important for now when we make an application at the end of the world. So let's have a look at a bit more at Ishmael as it comes out. So Abraham and Hagar have Ishmael, and then Sarah gets upset with with Hagar and kicks her out, more or less. And so she runs and she's in this place weeping, and God comes to her because she's weeping and crying. And this is where it picks up in Genesis chapter 16, verse 10. It says, "And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly." And who is her seed? Ishmael, right? So this is a promise from God to Hagar and Ishmael and all the way down. And it says, "It shall not be numbered for multitude." So this is the promise to Hagar about Ishmael. "And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction." Now we see it's God actually who named Ishmael. There's only a few people who've been named. I think it's 4 people: Ishmael, Isaac, John, and Jesus. Was it John? Was John named before?
Jacob.
Yeah,
John was too.
John was. Yeah. So this is a very special class of people, and so we have to take note. If God is saying, I'm going to name this child, there's something you need to know about this child, right? So he's saying that I'm going to name it. You shall call this child Ishmael. And why does she call him Ishmael? It says because
he's a wild man.
Not yet.
Lord
Is it?
heard.
Because the Lord has heard. Yeah. So this has got something to do with the Lord hearing, right? So she was in affliction. She cried to the Lord, and the Lord heard and named his son Ishmael because he heard, right? And we'll see that this is important when we get down to the role of the Ishmaelites and the children of the East and things like that, and even their relation to God's people. So the Lord then describes the character of Ishmael in the following verse. It says, "And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." Now this word wild, as you're saying, what would the...
Yeah, wild means wild.
Yeah?
Well, did you have it there?
Okay,
Or
so...
maybe an ass.
I've got the definition from Strong's. The word is H6501, and it means a wild ass. So when it says he's a wild man, it's not just a wild man. The translators put it as a wild man, but the Hebrew word actually means a wild ass, like a wild donkey or wild, like a horse, kind of. Yeah, the that genus of animals. So we've seen that when Ishmael comes, it comes because of a restraint put on Sarah, and he's named because the Lord has heard, and he's a wild man. One other thing I want to see is that he's also involved when God is giving Abraham a sign of the covenant. So in Genesis 17, we won't read it for sake of time. God comes to Abraham and says, "I'm going to make my covenant with you and your seed. And what will you do to these people? You will circumcise them." And this is before Isaac is born, but Ishmael is around. So Ishmael partakes of that covenant, although he's not 8 days old, but he partakes of this covenant. So we see from the beginning, Ishmael has a role to play, or is involved in the covenant of God. And these are very important things to remember as we now come forward to the end of the world again. So Abraham has Ishmael, and Ishmael is a son born because God heard. And then Hagar leaves and all that. And Sarah has Isaac. Isaac grows up. Sarah dies. And then Abraham remarries, and he marries a woman called Keturah. Yeah, is everyone familiar with Keturah? No? Okay. So if you go to Genesis 25. Genesis 25 and verse 1. It says, are we there? Okay. It says, then again, Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Okay, so the previous verse talks about Isaac. Isaac marries Rebecca, and it says that he was confident after his mother's death. But now the next verse says, after mentioning that Sarah died, it says that Abraham took another wife called Keturah. And now from verse 2 to verse 5, 2 to 4, it mentions all these sons that Abraham bore to Keturah. Keturah bore for Abraham. Or that Abraham had through Keturah, right? So the children of Abraham was not just Isaac and Ishmael, but you actually had quite a few more. And we'll pick up in verse 5. So although Abraham also has all these children, the one who's still special to him is Isaac, because he was a miracle child, more than any. And it says, and Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. But unto the sons of the concubines, and which concubines were these speaking about? Unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had. So these are children of Abraham, and who are the other children of Abraham apart from Isaac? Genesis 25 verse 5 tells us that he gave all his gifts to Isaac, and now it's talking about all the other sons of Abraham, basically everybody else. Ishmael and all the children of Keturah, because these are who are listed as the sons of Abraham. It says,
was she a concubine or was she a wife? Because that's totally different.
Yeah, I know that the concept of a concubine and a wife is different, but these are the only sons that are mentioned
Yes.
of Abraham. Because when you read that this chapter, it says that Keturah bore him these sons, and then he gave all his stuff to Isaac, and then all the other sons he sent them away somewhere, and it doesn't mention any other sons apart from Keturah's sons and Ishmael. So there might be it might be something that we need to take note of, the fact that it says concubine in one verse and says wife in another place, but we don't know of any other sons that he had. And after saying that he gave some things to Abraham and sent all the children of the concubines elsewhere, it doesn't mention any of the sons of Keturah or Ishmael after that, so you know they're not in a separate group from that. Yeah. So it says, Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived, eastward into an east country. So he gives all his gifts to Isaac, and where does he send the rest of his sons? He sends them east, and they now, through time, they end up being called the children of the east. So the children of the east come from this story of Abraham.
The other side of Abraham.
Yeah, the other side of Abraham. So you have Isaac and the children of the east, and this includes Ishmael and all the other children which Keturah had. So I don't think I have it in the notes, but does anyone know what Keturah means? So we have Ishmael. His name is Ishmael because God heard, right? And when you look in the sanctuary, what is the symbol of God's hearing? Revelation chapter 5 says that there was 420 elders and 4 beasts, and each of them had incense, which is the prayers of the saints, right? So how does God hear? He hears our prayers. So Ishmael has something to do with the incense, and that's how God hears with prayer, right? And now Keturah's name means incense, right? So we have Ishmael is because God heard, and Keturah's name means incense. Now, when you look at the history of the sanctuary, there were some things which the children of Israel had to do when they had the sanctuary. One of them was to burn incense at the golden altar of incense. But do you know where they got that incense from? They got it from the children of the east. They had no incense themselves. They were dependent or the children of the East to run the sanctuary, to run the altar of incense. So they were already dependent on them right from the beginning, right from when they got that. And this goes back to this tie between Abraham and his sons, yeah, because he blessed Ishmael. He had a covenant with Ishmael. He said, "I'm going to make you great and multiply you." And so
you're saying it actually goes back to God instead of Abraham, because God was the one who.
Yeah. So God's hand is in there, and now we see that the children of Israel were dependent on the children of the East for the incense. But let's have a look at some other applications of the children of the East and how they came to God to the aid really of God's people. So we have Joseph. What happened to Joseph when he was very young? He had a dream, told it to his brothers, and what did they decide to do? They decided to kill him. Kill him before they sell him. And then what happened? Then just when they're about to kill him, they saw what? A train of Ishmaelites were coming.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, I don't know if it was Reuben or Judah decided he said, let's just sell him instead and tear up his coat. So you can see already Joseph was about to be killed. And then just at the right time, the Ishmaelites come and rescue him and take him to Egypt. And he fulfills what God wanted him to fulfill. Another example, Moses. Moses was raised to be the deliverer of the children of Israel. And how did Moses try to deliver the children of Israel at first? Yeah, by force. He killed an Egyptian, and the word spread, and he had to flee. And where did he flee? Yeah, he fled to Midian, and Midian is one of the children of the East, right? So you see, Moses went and took refuge with the children of the East. At the time of the birth of Christ, we had God's people were supposed to know about Christ's birth, but some of them did and were trying to hide it, and others were just ignorant. But there's a group of people the two groups of people who knew about Christ's birth, and who were they? Were the shepherds and the wise men from the East. And what did the wise men from the East bring? They brought frankincense and myrrh and gold. So why was Jesus born in a manger? Why was he born in just a stable? Because they were poor, yeah? You couldn't afford to, they couldn't even, in modern times, couldn't afford even a hotel or a cheap B&B or whatever to be born there. But then Herod decided to kill all the young children, right? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And how did Christ escape that? How did Jesus escape that? He fled. They fled to Egypt, right? They were taken to Egypt. How did they afford to go to Egypt if they could not even pay for a manger? The children of the East came with gold. There's a reason why they came with these specific gifts. The gold was to help Mary and Joseph flee, right? And the frankincense was a symbol of prayers, of hearing their role in the sanctuary. And the myrrh was a symbol of Christ's death, because myrrh was embalming, something to embalm. So they recognized that Christ was going to, the man of directly recognized it, but they had God put it in their hearts to bring myrrh. So you see, they brought the gifts which even led Christ himself. He'd have been killed by Herod if it wasn't for the children of the East. And one of the history we have is the Reformation. Now, during the Reformation, there was a lot of attack on the people of the Reformation, the reformers. And one of the sources of relief for the Reformation was the children of the East again. So read a quote from Great Controversy 88, 197 and paragraph 2. It says, "A dark and threatening day had come for the Reformation. Notwithstanding the Edict of Worms declaring Luther to be an outlaw and forbidding the teaching or beliefs of his doctrines, religious toleration had thus far prevailed in the empire. God's providence had held in check the forces that opposed the truth. Charles V was bent on crushing the Reformation, but often, as he raised his hand to strike, he had been forced to turn aside the blow. Again and again, the immediate destruction of all who dared to oppose themselves to Rome appeared inevitable. So this is saying that their destruction is appearing inevitable. They're about to be wiped out. But at a critical moment, the armies of the Turk appeared on the eastern frontier, or the King of France, or even the Pope himself, jealous of the increasing greatness of the Emperor, made war upon him. And thus, amid the strife and tumult of nations, the Reformation had been left to strengthen and extend.
Amen.
So we see that even during the Reformation, the children of the East had a role to play in the Reformation. If they didn't come at the critical moment, as it says, then the Reformation would have been wiped out. And a lot of the Bible manuscripts that we have that were translated for the King James Version, they were actually kept. So obviously we know that the Roman Empire, the papacy tried to destroy all the manuscripts. And so they destroyed all they could get their hands on in Europe. But actually a lot of the texts were preserved in universities in the Arabian Crescent. So they preserved the text. So remember, they held the Bible at some point in high regard. I don't know if you ever read the bits of the Quran. It's more or less just, it's like the Bible. Some bits are changed, but they believe in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Psalms, and things like that. They believe it's twisted. They believe it's changed, but they still held it in high regard, and they preserved these texts, which otherwise would have been destroyed. And we wouldn't have had a King James Version. We wouldn't have had any of these. So we can see in history the children of the East have played such a critical role for God's people. At just the time they're about to be wiped out, the children of the East came and...
Excuse me. Does that got anything to do with the Ottoman Empire?
This? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's where we're going to go to now. So now I was taking a long time to put all these things in place. So now when we're reading Revelation chapter 9, we have an idea of exactly what's going on. These people are trying to attack God's people, and the trumpets are coming in response to that. So if you go to Revelation chapter 9, we saw that the three woes ended in Revelation chapter 8, verse 18. And we'll start in Revelation chapter 9, verse 1. Okay, so a disclaimer before we read Revelation chapter 9, there's a lot of symbology in this chapter. And I won't be able to cover every single thing in detail. I'll just pick out the key things. Uriah Smith does a good job in his book of describing a lot of the symbology in here. Some of the pioneers have explanation of the detailed symbols if you want to get them. But for this presentation, I'll just be touching on the key points. Some we've already laid in place. So if there's anything that I miss, it's because it will take a long time to get through it.
What is the name of the book that's out there that would describe this?
Daniel and the Revelation by Uriah Smith. And where it says that it's God's helping hand, and no other book can do the work that book can do. So I would suggest that. So let's get to Revelation chapter 9. I read verse 1 and verse 2. Oops. Revelation chapter 9, verse 1 and verse 2. Can anybody read that when they get there?
And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven onto the earth. And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit.
Okay. So we see a star fall from heaven. It's given the key of the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke comes out of this pit, out of this bottomless pit. So the star falling from heaven is really a key point for us to pick up, because what does the star represent in the Bible?
teacher.
Right. Has anyone got any proof texts for Revelation chapter 1, verse 20? Revelation chapter 1, verse 20, it tells us, right, could someone please read that when they get there?
Knowing this first, that no prophecy of the scripture.
Revelation chapter 1, verse 20. Did I say Revelation? Okay.
The mystery of the 7 stars, which thou sawest in my right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches.
Okay. So what is a star? An angel. And what is an angel? An angel is a messenger. When you look at the word angel, it's a messenger. I've got a few proof texts which I won't go to at the moment for time, but it just says, for example, like Paul was received as an angel, and in 2 Samuel it talks about David being like an angel. He's just a messenger, right? So that's what a star represents. A star is an angel or a messenger. But what is it about this star? It falls from heaven, so it's not a star just in heaven, right? So it's showing us something that happens to this star. It's not just a star which is up there. It falls from heaven. So we're gonna say something?
This is Jesus.
Are you sure? Did Jesus fall from heaven?
No, sorry.
It's Satan. Well, it was a satanic power. I'll give you that. But we'll have a look a bit more. Let's go to okay. In Jude chapter 13 will tell us that there are some wandering stars to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. So it shows that stars are not just always a good thing, right? Stars can have, as it says in Jude, it says these stars have the blackness of darkness reserved for them. And when you go up a few verses, it's like a delineation of these false teachers who are bringing false doctrine into the church, and so Paul just talks about them saying this, they're this, like this. And one of the analogies he uses is they're like wandering stars, right? So we see that even in this context, wandering a star, it represents a person who's coming with a message. If you go to Revelation chapter 12 and we read verse 4 and verse 9. And this is what you were intimating at. Revelation chapter 12, verse 4 and verse 9. Could someone please read that?
And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born.
Okay, so we see that Satan's tail has drawn some stars from heaven. So that means they've fallen. And we'll see that illustrated in verse 9. So it's like almost like an explanation of what happened in verse 4. If you could read verse 9 as well.
And the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and the angels were cast out with him.
Okay, so we see this imagery of Satan being cast into the earth, and he comes with his angels. And verse 4 is telling us that he drew a third part of the stars. So he's telling us like when he was falling, it's like his tail just went around and plucked like a third part of them and they came down. And so these angels that fell with Satan, were they good or were they were bad? So we have this picture in Revelation chapter 9 of a star falling from heaven, and it shows it's not a good messenger, right? So to this messenger is given a key, and the key opens the bottomless pit, and smoke comes out of this. And we haven't looked at Revelation 11 in a lot of depth, but Revelation 11 talks about. Does anyone have any idea what Revelation 11 talks about?
Earlier, we talked about it.
The two witnesses.
Yeah. It talks about the two witnesses and what happens to. Could you explain?
They're killed and bodies are in the streets.
Yeah. Yeah. So in Revelation chapter 11, as Sister Effie was saying, it's a story of these two witnesses, right? From near the beginning of the chapter until around near the end. And these two witnesses have a time period of a testimony. And what is that time period given in Revelation chapter 11? I think it's in verse 2. In fact, verse 3 as well. Just read Revelation 11, verse 3. Yeah. So verse 2 says 40 and 2 months. Verse 3 says these witnesses shall prophesy for 1,260 days, which is the same time period. This is the period of 538 to 1798, right? And as it's talking through this time, it says there's a point where a beast ascendeth out of the bottomless pit. And
Sorry, I wanted to ask, is the 42 months not the 1260, is it?
yeah, it's the same period of time.
It is? Okay.
Verse 3 says these witnesses prophesy for 1,203 score days.
So which ones are the two? I was always under the assumption it's Old and New Testament, which are the two witnesses.
Yeah.
So when it's describing the length of time, is there a description of the Old Testament?
So it says that they prophesy in sackcloth. So it just means it's a time of, when you read the Ellen White side, it's a time of obscurity. So when the papacy came to power in 538, the suppression of the scriptures was a very big thing. But they still continued to prophesy. You know, the Waldenses still had the parchments of.
Yeah, but that's still after Christ. That's not where I'm leaning. I'm leaning BC. Before Christ. I understand it's after that, but that's not what I'm trying to get at. If there's the old, I'm probably throwing everybody off here. Just don't mind me.
Okay, maybe we can take we can take up that question after, right? So these witnesses prophesy for 1,260 days or years, 538 to 1798, and then it says as they're coming to the end of their testimony, a beast ascended out of the bottomless pit, and so it talks about this 1,260 days. They're being persecuted, and at the end, a beast comes out and kills them, more or less. So during the 1,260 days, who is making war on them? 1,260 years? Yeah, the Roman Empire. But towards the end, something comes out of the bottomless pit. And what was this? What was this power that came out of the bottomless pit?
The dragon.
Yeah, it's friends. It says there's a beast that came out of the bottomless pit. And Ellen White says that this is friends. It says this.
The dragon? No?
No, not really. I mean, there's a way you can. What's that?
Give us the scripture
For that verse. Revelation 11, verse 7. I mean, I didn't want to go too deep into this text because it's a lot quite a bit.
It's the end time.
Pardon?
I see that as the end time event.
Okay, when Ellen White comments on this, she says that this was atheistic France. You know, they had the French Revolution, and they came out, and what did they do? They put away all religion. They killed anyone who was So this is what is symbolic of killing the witnesses, killing the two testaments, which is the Bible, the Old and New Testament. And this is a power that ascends out of the bottomless pit. What this represents is that it's a new manifestation of satanic power. So you had the papacy attacking the Bible all the way through. But towards the end, a beast comes out of a bottomless pit, which doesn't look like Christianity anymore, like the Catholicism, but it now looks like atheism, right? So it's still Satan using this to fight against it, but it's just a new manifestation of what Satan is using to fight. So Great Controversy 88, 268, paragraph 3 says, as they were approaching the termination of their work in obscurity, war was to be made upon them by the power represented as the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit. In many of the nations of Europe, the powers that ruled in church and state had for centuries been controlled by Satan through the medium of the papacy. So this is the war being made on the two witnesses. But it says, but here is brought to view a new manifestation of satanic power, right? And that's what it means to ascend out of the bottomless pit. It's a new manifestation. So when we're looking at Revelation chapter 9, we have this power that comes out of the bottomless pit. It's still a power being used, it's still a satanic power, but then it's a new manifestation. So, okay, before I go any further, because we've been talking about Islam when we say how God uses them to help God's people, it doesn't mean that they're in the right. For example, when the children of Israel went into captivity, who took them into captivity? In the time of Babylon, who was it? Yeah, Babylon. And which king was that? Nebuchadnezzar. And in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 9, what does it say about Nebuchadnezzar? Yeah, it says, I will send upon you Nebuchadnezzar, my servant. Right? So God is using them to accomplish his purposes, although Nebuchadnezzar is not one of God's people, but God is still using it to accomplish his purposes. In Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5 and 6, it says that, because Assyria, it says, the rod of mine anger and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. So God uses these things to bring about his purposes. So he's not in direct control. They're not following him directly. They're not following the way he wants them to follow, but he still uses them to bring about his purposes.
I think I could remember a story in the Old Testament where the children of Midian delivered God's judgment on God's people.
Yeah. They do. So God has used these people before to correct his people, so to speak. And even in Daniel chapter 1, it says that God gave Jehoiakim into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. It makes it seem like God he's doing it for them. And this is why when you grapple with some of the prophecies, it helps you understand how God deals with us more, in a different way than before. We used to think that God is just going to bless you and all these things, but then there's a way he deals with us in order to correct us, and sometimes it's a painful process, and that's what he's trying to get us to understand through these symbols in the Bible. So here we're talking about a satanic manifestation, but we'll see that they're being used by God still. God is still in control of where they're going on what they're doing, so to speak. Okay, so this so remember we saw that the curse conquers does not come. There's a Sunday law that comes, and then roughly 70 years later a trumpet comes. So even to locate this next trumpet, the fifth trumpet, there was a Sunday law in 538 AD, and roughly 70 years later you had the rise of Mohammedanism, Islam in 606 AD. And another symbol for the bottomless pit is the wilderness of Arabia. It's just a place, it's just a barren waste. When you look at the word bottomless pit, it has this. When you look at it in the Greek, it talks about a very barren place where there's not much, like a bottomless pit. Nothing good can come out of there, and so it symbolizes Arabia in this context. It can also symbolize that. And as I said, Uriah Smith will go through this and give great detail about this. So this represents Muhammad in the year 606 AD. He gets these visions from God, and he starts his new religion, and he starts getting followers. And if you look at one of the primary things he wanted to do was to reform Christianity, so to speak. He said Christianity is fallen, and this is why the Quran and all these things don't have a close tie to Christianity. So they wanted to reform Christianity, and how they wanted to reform was by force. They don't. Muslims nowadays, when you look at the religious extremists in the Middle East, they don't plead with you nicely, they don't Bible study with you, they don't, visit you every Sabbath to have a study. They tell you, they choose this or yeah. So that's the method of conversion. So let's read verse 3 and 4. Read Revelation chapter 9, verse 3 and 4.
And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power.
In fact, we'll just stop there and just quickly talk about that verse. So this smoke, out of this smoke comes locusts. So out of the smoke that come out of Arabia comes locusts. When you look in the story of Gideon, I think it's in Judges chapter 6, it talks about these children of the east, and there were like multitudes. They're like locusts for multitudes. Yeah. So this symbol of the locust represents a multitude of people. And in fact, in Judges chapter 6, I think it's the children of the east as well. I remember the covenant with Ishmael, with Hagar, about Ishmael said, I'll make your seed, I'll multiply you exceedingly and make your seed like very much. So this is another point to children of Hagar, Ishmael, and the children of the east. And it says, unto them was given the power as the scorpions of the earth have power. And how does a scorpion have power? Where's the power of the scorpion? In its tail. And Isaiah chapter 9, verse 15, I think. What does it tell us about the tail? It says the prophet that teaches lies is the tail. So it's like the lies or the false doctrines of Islam is what is represented by the power being the tail. So they'd go around and convert people to this false ideology, and that was where their power was, and that's why they had a lot of power there. So if you read verse 4.
And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither anything green, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads.
Okay, so so we see here. What do we see in this chapter? In this verse, I mean. Yeah. We have something to do with that. Yeah. So these people are told something about those who have the seal of God. They have a role to play in the seal of God. So they're told to attack only those who did not have the seal of God. And this will become important to us because we know the most perfect place that we see the seal of God is the end of the world, where it's the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the seal of God. And so when we bring this to our time, this verse will have a lot of impact or weight for us to understand. Because as we've seen through the time, these children of the East have helped those with the seal of God, like we saw with Joseph, we saw with Moses, we saw with Christ, we saw with the Reformers, these people who, okay, like the Reformers didn't really keep the Sabbath, but then they still had it. They're still God's people to some extent, and they were protected and spared, and they could go on and do their work because of the children of the East. Okay, read verse 5, and I'll skip all the symbols from verse 6 to verse 10, and we'll pick up at verse 11 after verse 5. It says, and to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months, and the torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. So they are told to attack those who do not have the seal of God during the time that they are working. And we know at this time period, when this trumpet comes into place, the pagan Rome has already been dissolved. It's now the time period of papal Rome. This is when these trumpets are active, right? and they're told to work for 150. No, what does it say? It says, they say 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 months. And we know this is before 1844 because we saw the time period in which the trumpets were. And before 1844, we had, as Sister Michelle was talking about this morning, we had prophetic time, right? So you could take a prophecy in the Bible and apply it prophetically. And so if 42 months is 1,260 days, how many days is 5 months? Yeah, 150. We haven't taken the time to show it, but if when you go to Genesis, you can show that each month has 30 days, and 30 times 5 is 150. 150 days, but we apply the day for year principle and get 150 years. Let me just. So we see that they're going to do a work of tormenting a lot for 5 months. And this 5 months is a representation of 150 days, which is 150 years. Now, to see when that starts, we'll read verse 11. Revelation chapter 9, verse 11.
And they had a king over them, which name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon.
Okay. So we have a time period when the trumpet starts, but what did this trumpet also have that the other 4 trumpets didn't have? Yeah, it had a woe. And one thing we'll see when we study is that the woe comes within the time period of the trumpet, but it doesn't necessarily start or end when the trumpet also ends. Because we see that this trumpet started in 606 AD, but then before the woe started, Revelation chapter 9 verse 11 tells us that they had a king over them, and his name was Apollyon and Abaddon. And so they must have a king over them, like one person to unite them. From 606 AD, when Muhammad died and they continued, they were just like in bands of like just like a group here and a group there and a group there, and they were just going and attacking here and attacking there, but they weren't very successful because they were just going in bands. Like they weren't a unified, solidified army. They had to consolidate all their forces, all their power to really now bring upon what's called like a war, such infliction that you could say like whoa, like that's a lot. Like right now, there's a lot of attacks here and there going on, even radical Islam right now. But let's say they were to consolidate as a nation. Let's say Iran just decided to start bombing places because they're a nation. They have a lot of resource. They have a lot of power. They'll do much more damage, and even be called a woe. So this is why this woe starts at the time when they have a king over them. And in the scriptures, in Exodus chapter 33 and 34, Moses asked God to let him see his glory. And what does he proclaim? Yeah, he proclaims the name of the Lord. He talks about the name of the Lord, but he switches that interchangeably with his character. Yeah, so his name means his character. For example, the 144,000, they have the Father's name written in their foreheads. So does it actually mean they have, let's say, like a tattoo or something across their forehead? No, it doesn't mean that. It means they have the character of God reproduced in them, and that's why they're part of the 144,000. So even this, when it says then the name is Abaddon and Apollyon, this actually just refers to their character. And when you look at these words, Abaddon and Apollyon, they mean destruction. Does anybody have like a reference, a study Bible with a little reference, like a number on there?
For what? For
Like when you have a study Bible,
Yeah,
it
I
has
have
like
study
a little
Bible.
number reference. Revelation chapter 9, verse 11. Any of the names, either Abaddon or Apollyon, does it have a number on it? Mine has that. But I just wondering if anybody else has it. Okay. So if nobody else has it, I'll just you can use, I don't know if you use eSword, or you can use the concordance to have a look at this word. But in my Bible, it says, I've got an LY Study Bible. It has a number 1 over next to Apollyon, and it explains that this name means a destroyer, right? So the name or the character of these people who have a king over them is destroyer or destruction. And so in the process of time, these people consolidated and they got a king, and this king's name was Othman, right? And that's where we get the Ottoman Empire from. So you can see that he was like the king. He was the king, the beginner of this empire, and that's why even it was called Ottoman towards there. But then you also have to have the character, which is the destroying part as well. So they have a king, and the name or their character is to destroy. And on the 27th of July, 1299, these forces, which are now consolidated under Othman, had now had the power and the strength. And on 27th of July, 1299, they decided to attack the Byzantine Empire. Right? They attacked some area in Greece, and that's what now started this war. So from then on, it's just relentless like attacks by this consolidated power, and that's why we begin the first war in 27th July 1299. So we have the trumpets starting in 606 AD. I put the 5th trumpet here, and it goes through time. But then on the 27th of July 1299, we begin the first war, because we haven't seen a war yet. And how long were they to torment? How long were they to go on and do this work for?
5 months.
Yeah, we just read it. It was 5 months, which is 150 years. So let's add 150 years to 1299, and what do we get? So we have a 9, 4, we'll carry 1 because that's 14. 3 plus 1 is 4, and 1. So this brings us to the date of 27th July 1449, because we've gone 150 years later. And you see that these dates are very important, because these are used to make the prediction which Josiah Litch had. And what did he predict? Predicted the exact day that these events would take place, and they came to pass. So, so from July 27 July 1299, for 150 years was the first war, and it came to an end on 27th July 1449. So this ended the first trumpet, the 5th trumpet, and the first war. So we have I'll put it down here. It's the 5th trumpet there, and the first war goes like that. So you can see that the trumpet goes for longer than the war does, because for the war to happen, you need to have a king over them whose character was death and destruction, and that's when they had a king, the Ottoman Empire, and they went against they went against Greece at that time, which is part of the Byzantine Empire. Okay, verse 12 says, "One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter." So it tells us that after these events, the 150 years is finished. 1 woe is past, and there's 2 more to come. So it picks up then from there in verse 13 and from verse 13. It says, and the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God. So again, they're still at, where's the sixth angel? He's still in the golden altar, which is before God, which you saw is still that time period between 31 AD and 1844. Which is before God, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men. So we have here the end of the fifth trumpet, and we have the beginning of the sixth trumpet, more or less straight after. Because what happens in July 27th, 1449 is, okay, after time goes, these Muslims, they spread their doctrines, they really hate Rome. Even nowadays, when you look at, there's a newspaper article, in fact it's here. This article here, from this source, and it says that ISIS, their aim is to bring down Rome, but they attack the USA because the USA is the dogs of Rome. So their aim has always been to bring down Rome, and they started from this history. And what they wanted to do is to attack the Roman Empire, and their principal base in the Roman Empire was Constantinople. But this time, Constantine has moved the capital from Rome to Constantinople. So you had this emperor of the Byzantine Empire, and he's in Constantinople, and he dies. And now his I think it was his son who wanted to come onto the next heir, the next person who's supposed to come and ascend the throne. But at this time, there was four major sultanates in maybe I didn't explain that well. At this time, the Ottoman Empire is grown so big that they need micromanagement in each area. And there's four main areas around the river Euphrates, around the Middle Eastern area. There's four main sultanates where you have four people who are kind of like taking a quarter of the work each. And when this emperor wants to ascend to the throne in Constantinople, he asks permission from these four sultanates and says, can I take the throne? Right? So he's asking permission to take the throne. If you have to ask permission to take the throne, are you really taking the throne? Are you really in power? No, you're not in power. And this is what starts this war, because you now see that these people now have power. They have a lot of power over this eastern part of Rome, and this is what starts the sixth war, because it talks about the four angels which are bound in the river Euphrates, and this relates to those four sultanates, those four areas, where these powers have been located. These four quarters of this Islamic empire. And so it says, these four angels were loosed, and they prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year for to slay a third part of men. So we saw 5 months is 150 days. And how much is an hour, a day, a month, and a year? Let's just put them down. So we have 1 year. I think we'll close shortly. 1 year, 1 month, 1 day, and 1 hour. Do you all see that in the verse? Mm-hmm. Yeah, an hour, a day, a month, and a year. So we had to apply the day period principle here to get 5 months is 150 days, which is the same, but we applied the day period principle and got 150 years. So we'll turn all these into days first and then apply the day period principle. So how many days are in 1 year? 360. How many in 1 month? 30. How many in 1 day? 1 day. And an hour is, we'll say, a 24th of a day. Yeah, I mean, because you can't really have. That's the only way I can express an hour as a day is 1/24th of a day. Yeah. So let's add up these three here and see what we get. How many days do we get? Yeah. So 0 plus 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. 6 plus 3 is 9. 3 plus 0, because there's no other one. 391. Yeah. So we can just times this by 360 to give us, we times this by the day for year principle. And this gives us 391 years. Yep. So now to get this 24th of a day, one day is a year, and a year is 360 days. So this is equivalent to 1/24 times 360, because a day is a year. Yeah. So we're doing it slightly different to here, because here you can just take the days and just say the years. But here we have to actually do the math of multiplying this by that. And what does that give us? Yeah. So we have 15 days. Yeah. Okay, so that, so we have from the year, the month, and the day, we have 391 years. And from the 1 hour, we have 1/24th part of a year, which is 1/24th part of 360, which is 15 days. So this is where we get the 391 years and 15 days prophecy from 91 years and 15 days. Okay, so I'm just gonna. Sorry, did anybody need that? Sorry. Okay, so this 391 years and 15 days started in 27th July 1449. So we actually have to take into account the day it started, because we have days in the prophecy, right? So let's do a bit of maths and see let's add them together and see what date we come to. Okay, so we have 27th July 1449. So this is the month, this is the days, and this is the years. So we'll add the years first, because that's simple. So we'll add 391 to 1449, and what do we get? 9 plus 1 is 0. 10, yeah. Then you carry 1. That becomes 5 plus 9 is 14. Carry another 1. 4 plus 3 is 7, plus 1 is 8. And then we have the 1. So this takes us from 27th July 1449 to 1840. So we've taken care of the years, but we still have 15 days in which to basically know when we're going to come to the end of the prophecy. So let's add 15 days to 27 July. And how many days are there in July? It's 31 days, okay? So, okay, we'll count until the end of July, and then we'll count to the end of July, and then add the remaining of the days in August, right? So 27 plus 1 is 28, and we have 14 days left. Then we get to 29, we have 13 days left. We have 30, we have 12 days left. 31, we have 11 days left, right? So we have 11 days to carry over into what month? Because we've come to the end of the month, so we have to carry that into August. And what date does that give us? 11th of August. Oh, really? 1840, right? So this is what Josiah Litch used to prove the day for year principle. So in 1838, this is what he predicted. He predicted that, well, at first he said in 1840, and as he came closer, he said August 11th, 1840. And this prediction was fulfilled to the very letter, as Ellen White says in the Great Controversy, in August 11th, 1840. And this is the end of the Second War. So I'm really sorry I've gone over time again. I need to work on that. But I think we'll close there. I think that's probably enough food for thought at the moment.
What is the quotation in Ellen White?
When she talks about it, it might be here. Yeah, there we go. In Great Controversy 334, paragraph 4. Yeah. So she even quotes this. She quotes this event that happened in 27 July, 1844. So in Great Controversy 334, paragraph 4. In fact, we'll just read that. We'll read that. We'll read that quote and then we'll close. So she says, in the year 1840, another remarkable fulfillment of prophecy excited widespread interest. 2 years before, Josiah Litch, one of the leading ministers preaching the Second Advent, published an exposition of Revelation 9, predicting the fall of the Ottoman Empire. According to his calculations, like the calculation we just did, this power was to be overthrown in AD 1840, sometime in the month of August. And only a few days previous to his accomplishment, he wrote, allowing the first period of 150 years, so we saw this period of 150 years, to have been exactly fulfilled before the Decozes ascended to the throne by the permission of the Turks, which was here. Remember, we talked about this emperor who needed to ascend, but he had to ask permission to ascend. And that the 391 years and 15 days commenced at the close of the first period, which is here. It will end on the 11th of August, 1840, when the Ottoman power in Constantinople may be expected to be broken. And this, I believe, will be found to be the case. Josiah Litch in Signs of the Times, an expositor of prophecy, August 1st, 1840. So he says this 10 days before the fulfillment. And Ellen White goes on to say that at the very time specified, Turkey, through her ambassadors, accepted the protection of the Allied powers of Europe, and thus placed herself under the control of the Christian nations. And this was the event to mark the close of the ascendancy of the Ottoman Empire. Because at the beginning, the Christian power had to submit to 4 sultanates, said, can we ascend the throne? And here at the end, the Ottoman Empire actually submitted to the 4 Christian nations. At that time, I think it was England, Russia, Germany, and Prussia. So you see like a reversal of what happened at the beginning. Remember, God shows the end from the beginning, and we see that this even happened in the history of the world. Okay, so I think we'll close there. I'd like to Jerry for the word of prayer, just to close. Dear Father in heaven, we come before you, thanking you for your word that you've given us unto us, these wonderful prophecies, wonderful fulfillments that you're showing us at this time. We know that the understanding of these trumpets and woes is essential to upholding the day for your principle, and it worked a wonderful Reformation in the history of the Millerites. And I pray that by studying these things, we may have a wonderful Reformation also. Lord, we thank you and ask for forgiveness for going over, Lord, but I pray that we may have been of benefit, Lord, and that you may impress us with these truths, help us understand them and retain them, and be able to share them with others concisely. All these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.